Shopify grows with your business no matter how far or big you grow. From the launch your online shop stage to the first real-life store stage, all the way to the did we just hit 1 million orders stage? Shopify is there to help you grow. Whether you're selling your fans' next favorite shirt or an exclusive piece of podcast merch, Shopify helps you sell everywhere. From their all-in-one e-commerce platform to their in-person POS system, wherever and whatever you're selling, Shopify's got you covered. Sign up for a $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/income, all lowercase. Go to shopify.com/income to grow your business no matter what stage you're in.
Welcome to Accelerate Your Business Growth, where we're exploring all sorts of business topics. Experts from around the world join me, your host, Diane Helbig, for a conversation where they share their expertise with all of you. Take what you need when you need it. Featured on Inc.com, Forbes, and MSNBC's Your Business, this podcast is recognized as one of the best podcasts for small business, sales, leadership, social media, and more. When it comes to business, Accelerate Your Business Growth has got it covered. And now on with the show. Here we go. My guest today is Jim Kraus. Jim is the president of Buyer Persona Institute, BPI, and a leading authority on buyer personas and buying insights. BPI's buyer persona research and workshop methods are the gold standard for thousands of marketers who rely on these studies to understand prospective buyer needs and their solutions. These insights help marketers develop strategies and messaging that drive leads, improve conversion rates, and increase sales. Jim recently wrote a second edition of the book, Buyer Personas, and I understand that today, as of this recording, he just got it in hand. So congratulations, Jim, and welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Diane. Great to be here.
I'm thrilled to have you here. I don't think we talk enough about buyer personas, but so let's start with what actually they are and how organizations use them to, improve their marketing and their sales.
Yeah, so let me try to answer the second question first. I mean, the way that you want to use a buyer persona, right? And then we'll talk about what is and isn't a buyer persona. The way you want to use a buyer persona or a buyer persona that is, authentic and impactful to your marketing sales efforts should literally inform just about every marketing and sales decision that you make, right? I mean, in terms of how do you go about influencing your prospective buyers, the buyers that are, you're trying to convince to even consider you, that you're trying to influence to choose you over maybe some competitive options. You're choosing an effective buyer persona will give you insights that will help you do that in all your marketing and sales efforts. Really, that's the end goal. So if your buyer persona helps increase awareness and the leads that you're getting, if it helps inform things that you're doing that improves conversion rates, so you're closing more business, and if it also helps you market more efficiently and even lower costs, you're on the right track about what a buyer persona really should do for you. To answer the other question that you had is, when you say buyer persona, traditionally a lot of people think of, when you say those words, buyer persona, traditionally a lot of people think of a profile of a fictional buyer, right? You may know some demographics, you may know even some of their priorities and goals and what keeps them up at night. But those buyer personas, they're really describing an individual or a role involved in the decision process. And those are fine. Those can be helpful. The major thing that they don't have is they don't tell you anything about how to influence that person or that role when they're making a very specific buying decision.
Oh.
Right. So let's say you're a CIO, right? And you sell technology solutions. I can assure you that a CIO will have different needs, requirements, concerns, purchase criteria, if they're purchasing a CRM solution versus if they're buying a servers for their data center, right? Those are two very different buying decisions, same individual that may be involved in the buying decision, right? So then the question really becomes, what is an effective buyer persona, right? So couple of things, we can talk about these in more detail if you like, but basically effective buyer persona really gives you deep insights about 5 specific things involved in a buying decision that you're trying to influence. So for any listeners out there, think about the product or services that you offer, and 5 things that think about if you had these 5 things. Number 1 is we call them priority initiatives. These are triggers. These are the reasons that your prospective buyers even start looking for a solution to meet a need. It's the reason at this moment in time they say, "Hey, enough is enough. We got to do something, or we need to do something different." Right?
Yeah.
The second major part of it is what we call success factors. And success factors, you can think of these simply as outcomes or benefits that buyers want from making this purchase decision. Right? What are the outcomes they really care about most? Right?
Mm-hmm.
The third one we call perceived barriers, and this is a really important one because what it is it's all the things that cause your buyers to have concerns or even fears about making this buying decision. It's the things that may cause certain providers to fall out of consideration, certain characteristics of a provider, right? The reason these are important is because when it comes to these types of buying decisions, particularly high consideration buying decisions, buyers are going to be anxious. They may never have purchased something like this before, or they haven't purchased it in a while. You want to know what those fears and concerns are up front to help you market and sell effectively. The fourth thing is decision criteria, fourth area of insight. And decision criteria are all the questions that your buyers are going to have as they evaluate their options and winnow down the alternatives to make a final decision, right? These are what are the things they're talking about, internally when they're making these decisions? What are the key questions? How are they comparing different providers? What are those nitty-gritty questions when they really get kind of deeper into their evaluation? And then the fifth and final part of your buyer persona, or fifth buying insight, is buyer's journey. And that includes what are the steps your buyers take in their journey when they're making this purchase? Who are the key influencers that are involved in it? And what are the information sources they use to make a decision? So we collectively call these the 5 rings of buying insight. And if you have these 5 insights, they take all the guesswork out of your marketing sale, right? It's one of those things where if you knew these things, you'd really have the wind at your back in all your outreach efforts and the way that you communicate with prospective customers, because you'd have a really strong handle on their mindset and their behaviors as they make these decisions.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean, that's great. So then my probably obvious question is, so how does someone find this out? Is that, in the discovery process when they're talking to a prospect? What's going on here?
Yeah, so the way to do it, the best way to do it, and we've been doing this for over 15 years now, we still haven't found a better way to do it, is to talk to recent buyers and to interview recent buyers. And let me define what a recent buyer is first. So a recent buyer is somebody that made the exact same buying decision that you're trying to influence over the past 3 to 12 months, right? Nothing really more than a year. If you can get it closer to 3 months, the better.
Okay.
Recent buyers are not just your current customers, right? If you're interviewing your own customers, they've already made a decision, they have some inherent biases, and they're only going to provide a slice of the marketplace, right? Because unless you have all the customers out there, that's only a small slice of the marketplace. So recent buyers are those that made that buying decision that either A, purchased from you, right? Are your current customers, B, considered you but picked another provider or competitor, or C, maybe never considered you, right? Because that is your entire market, right? So you want your buyer persona to be reflective of the broader marketplace, not just your own customers.
Okay.
So you want to identify and find those people, and we can talk more about how you do that if you'd like.
Yeah.
But the key thing is when you do find them, you want to have, we call these in-depth interviews in the quote unquote research biz, but it's a conversation. It's typically a 30-minute conversation that you have with them where you literally go through their entire buying decision. We really only ask one scripted question, and you should as well. And we say, take me back to the day when you first decided that you needed X. and X would be whatever the product or service is that you're selling. And then you say to them, tell me what happened, right? And from there, from that point forward, everything you're doing is asking them questions so that you can understand all the steps that they took in their buyer's journey and all the things that were really important to them, right? So you could ask them questions like, hey, tell me a little bit about the providers that you consider in the solutions. How many were they, and how did you originally come up with the initial list of providers you were even considering? Oh, and they'll tell you some things, and you could probe further and say, oh, you mentioned that you searched on Google, like what were some of the websites that were informative, blah, 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 et cetera, et cetera. And you constantly prompt and probe, and you're always trying to ask additional questions so you can get at those levels of insight. If you keep asking those questions as they take you through how they came up with their initial consideration set, and you ask questions about, tell us a little bit how you winnowed down your choices, what types of information was the most useful, where did you get that information, so on and so forth. When you're done with those conversations, you're going to have everything you need to develop those 5 insights I just mentioned to you. They're just going to fall out naturally, right? So you don't want to just do one buyer interview. We typically recommend anywhere from 10 to 12, sometimes 16 buyer interviews, and then you look for patterns in the data across the interviews that you do. But recent buyers are the experts, right? They're the ones that literally just went through this. So why not talk to them, find out what was important?
That's so interesting. And thank you for saying how many, because that was going to be my next question. So, but then I'm going to go backward and say, okay, but so how do you find these people?
Yeah. So a couple of things are really important. And in the book that we talked about, the second edition of the book that just came out, we provide a lot of detail about how to design a buyer persona study and how to actually go about doing interviews and doing the analysis, et cetera. But your question is fundamentally, there's two questions you want to answer. Number one is, what is the buying decision you're trying to influence? So what is the product, service, or solution that you sell, right? Okay. It seems like a straightforward question, but it's sometimes it's not, right? Like you really have to think about like, okay, what are we actually offering the marketplace, right? And there could be some nuance there. So I'll go back to that CRM example just because I used it earlier, right? It could be CRM, but maybe you're a provider that's focused on CRM, a certain aspect of CRM, like the sales module of CRM. So that would be the buying decision you're trying to influence, right? So you identify that first. The second thing you identify is, what is your target market or ideal customer profile, ICP, whatever you call it? What is the market that you're really focused on, you're trying to sell into? Once you identify those two things, the buying decision you're trying to influence and the characteristics of the buyers that you're targeting, then you can go out and work with either recruiting partners that do this to help you find those folks, or for your current customers. Now, again, that's only one part of this.
Right.
You can also maybe leverage some of your databases to help you at least find those folks.
Yeah, those ones I think would be the easiest. So that's interesting. So there's actually people out there who can help you find the people you want to talk to. I had no idea.
Correct. Yeah. I mean, there's one of the hardest things to do is, and we talk a lot about it in the book, is, and it's doable because like I said, we've done hundreds of these, is to develop very specific requirements around the buying decision that you've defined and the target market that you're going after. And you can develop questions that help you screen people in, right? People that you'd want to talk to, but even more importantly, screen people out. Yeah. People that you wouldn't want to talk to simply because they don't have the insights that you need. Because you need to really find somebody, and if it's B2B, you need to find the organization that's made that purchase decision in the past 3 to 12 months. And you also need to find an individual within that company, again, if it's B2B, that was involved and can tell you chapter and verse all the things that happened and that were important in the buying decision as they went through it.
Very interesting. And so people, organization, either one or both, are they fairly open to sharing that information?
Yeah, very, very open. So, typically you'd want to pay them a stipend. Typically it's monetary, and this is a form of quote unquote market research.
Sure.
So this is not an abnormal ask. And it's interesting, I know sometimes marketers are get a little jittery talking to buyers, and they really shouldn't, because the beauty of these interviews is you're asking questions to somebody where they went through something that was very important to them, right? This buying decision was probably really important to them and their organization if it was a B2B buy. And they don't have to pontificate or think big thoughts here, right? You're not taxing them intellectually. You're literally asking them what happened,
Yeah.
what was important, right? And what we find is the buyers we talk to love talking to us because they almost find it cathartic
Huh.
talking about something that was probably pretty, at some level, stressful, right? Because they're worried about making the right decision. They're equally worried about not making a bad or the wrong decision, right?
Right.
So we usually schedule our interviews for 30 minutes, and we find buyers that we talk to are definitely willing to stay even longer than that if they have the time.
Wow, that's amazing. Are there, so you go through this process and you find out these characteristics. Are there ever times where then it's surprising to, to your client about what you found out about the buyer?
Yeah, so two things usually happen with the buyer personas, both of them equally good. One is some of their hunches, hypotheses, conventional wisdom, call it what you will, are validated, right? We find that those things that they kind of thought were important to buyers early and then later stages of the buying journey are in fact important, right? And that's valuable because it just provides confirmation, right? It gives you confidence that either things that you're already doing around these insights or things that you're planning, you just feel more confident that you're not wasting resources and effort, right? So that's number one.
Yeah.
The second thing will happen is you will find things that are surprising, or there might be things that you sort of kind of knew, or maybe you suspected, but you didn't really know for sure. You didn't have confirmation on it, right? And these insights will shine a much brighter spotlight on certain things that are important to buyers. The third thing I'll mention is, and this is one of the things I mentioned, the 5 rings of buying insight that are buyer persona. The other really important thing to include your buyer persona is buyer quotes that substantiate each of the buying insights. And what I mean by that is, so when you look across the interviews and you identify, hey, we've noted that several of the buyers feel a certain way, they've identified this as an important success factor. You want to identify that insight, but you also want to support it with actual buyer quotes within your persona, because what that does is it gives you additional nuance. It gives you a much deeper understanding, a raw understanding of you, if you will, of your prospective customers. You get to hear how they think about this. You get to hear how they talk about it. You get to hear some of their angst. You hear them talk about competitors, possibly yourself as well. So not only do you get the insights, you get this second and third order of understanding that when you're developing marketing and sales strategies and messaging are invaluable.
Oh, that's so interesting. Yeah. Yeah, I can see that. That is fascinating. So, if there's, someone listening, there's a company out there and they're considering, figuring this out. It's the first time they've ever done it. What advice do you have for them for getting started?
First of all, make sure that you have a plan, a game plan about how you want to go about developing your buyer persona, right? So, we have a lot of information. We can talk a little bit about, where you can go for additional information. But our website, for example, has a lot of information that would help folks that want to do this themselves.
Okay.
We have a master class up there. We have other thought leadership up there around this. I know we mentioned the book earlier.
Yeah.
So there's lots of things we try to make available to folks that want to do it themselves.
Okay.
The only word of caution I would give is, one, make sure that whoever is doing the study is objective as possible. Right. So anybody involved with a particular deal or opportunity, I would suggest not do these interviews because you don't want to have salespeople doing these interviews. Right. You want it to be, number one, completely objective and unbiased. Number two is you don't want the person you're interviewing to feel like there's some other ulterior motive, like a sales call coming after this. Right. So it has to be really objective. So that's one thing to make sure of. The other thing is what I mentioned earlier is make sure that you define the buying decision you're trying to influence and who you're actually targeting so that when you do find these buyers, they are the actual people that you're selling to, right? The way I describe it is, these are people that you would want in your sales pipeline. Picture in your mind's eye the ideal people in your sales pipeline. Those are the people you want to go find.
Boy, yeah, that makes a ton of sense. And I love that. I agree. I don't think, I think being objective is so difficult in situations like that. And I can understand why it is critically important that whoever is doing the research is, unbiased, so to speak. They're just really looking to find out the information, not spin it.
Yeah, the way I always say is for interviews is the interviews that you do, it's more like a journalist interview than a marketing or market research interview. Because when you approach the interview, you have to approach it where, you're talking to a buyer, they have a story to tell, right? They have a great buying story to tell that you're dying to hear, right? Because it's going to tell you everything you need to know to help influence other buyers just like them, right?
Right.
So when you approach the interview, you want to be asking questions to probe and to understand, right? So you don't want to lead them, right? Because if you're internal or you're a salesperson or you have some biases, the risk is you either lead the witness a little bit or you prompt them with certain things that the buyer themselves didn't come up with, right? So you want the buyer to be revealing everything, right? So, so let's say, for example, you're interviewing a buyer and they say, hey, one of the important things that we're trying to get from this purchase is we want to improve efficiencies. The first question the interviewer should ask is like, well, tell me a little more. What do you mean by improving efficiencies?
Yeah.
And then he may tell you a little bit more about that. And you say, oh, that thing you mentioned was interesting. Why was that important? If you notice, these questions I'm saying are very open-ended.
Yeah.
Right. I'm not aiding the witness. I'm also, because I'm not maybe an expert on the product or service, if I'm somebody internal, I don't even have that in my mind as far as where I might want to take them, right?
Yeah.
I'm trying to position my product. It's just, in your DNA when you're inside the company. So it doesn't mean you can't do them yourself. You just have to be really careful and be really objective and unbiased is the advice.
Yeah, boy. Why even take the risk? Let's not. Okay, so looking forward, what changes do you see, if any, in the future of how marketing and sales will be using these buyer insights and personas?
Really, it's a lot, obviously a lot has changed in marketing sales over the last, 15, 20 years, but a lot remains the same, and the buyer persona is the way that we've been talking about it today and defining it, the very specific framework that's, really battle tested. That won't change, right? Because at the end of the day, you're trying to win the trust and confidence of buyers. Especially when it comes to high consideration buying decisions, price aside, the provider and the solution is going to win is the one that can make the buyer feel like, hey, if I make this choice, I'm going to get the outcomes I want, and I feel like nothing's going to go wrong, right? So the only way to do that is to really understand the nitty gritty of the buyer's mindset and what makes them go through this buying decision. The mechanics of how you use that may be different, right? So today, maybe you're using it for, SEO type activities you have going on or doing more personalized marketing plays, right? You may be using those insights differently versus mechanisms that were available 5, 10 years ago. But fundamentally, the people you're selling to are still people, right? They still have wants, needs, anxieties. And if you don't get that right, then everything else is gonna, you're just not going to be terribly efficient and you're going to waste resources. The analogy I always give is that a buyer persona is like the foundation of the house, right? It's literally the cement foundation, and all the other things as far as how you interact with buyers is the drywall and the plumbing and the electrical, right?
Yeah.
This is really foundational stuff.
Yeah, right. I get it. That's great. And and tell us about the book.
Yeah, so it's the second edition of book. So Adele Ravella is the founder of Buyer Persona Institute, and she wrote Buyer Personas about 10 years ago now, right? So we've learned a lot in the last 10 years in terms of just things that we wanted to communicate in the book, either better or different way, and things we wanted to add to the book to provide even more step-by-step practical guidance for how organizations can develop buyer personas and then how they can use them as well. So the book is available July 30th. It's on pre-sale now on Amazon and Barnes and Noble, and it's called Buyer Personas Revised and Expanded: Gain Deep Insight into Your Customers' Buying Decisions and Win More Business.
That's terrific. Thank you. And I'll make sure that is in the show notes. And so, Jim, thank you for being here. But will you also let the listeners know how they can find you, please?
Yeah, sure. I mean, two places. Either one, buyerpersona.com is our website. And there's all kinds of information that we put out there to try to help folks that are interested in pursuing this type of buyer persona. The other way is LinkedIn. So I'm pretty active on LinkedIn. I'm always trying to post things around buyer personas and buying insights more broadly. So feel free to follow or connect with me there. And hopefully some of the stuff we share through that channel in particular will be helpful.
Sure. Yeah. Wonderful. Thank you so much. And listeners, thank you. You are who we're doing this for. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Accelerate Your Business Growth, a production of Evergreen Podcasts. Discover more episodes of this podcast and explore others at evergreenpodcast.com. As always, continue to prosper and be curious. And if you're looking to get your sales strategy headed in the right direction, pick up a copy of Succeed Without Selling on Amazon or wherever books are sold. Until we meet again on another episode of Accelerate Your Business Growth, goodbye and good day.
Do you love news about LinkedIn, Indeed, Google, and just about every other recruitment tech company out there?
Hell yeah. I'm Chad.
I'm Cheese.
We're the Chad and Cheese Podcast.
All the latest recruiting news and insights are on our show.
Dripping in snark and attitude.
Subscribe today wherever you listen to your podcasts.
We out.